For 2 years, every morning at 6:15, Rebecca Sullivan opened her back door and set down a bowl of food for a stray dog that wouldn't let her touch him. Her neighbors called it wasteful. Her daughter called it foolish. But when a veteran in a dusty uniform knocked on her door one autumn morning with tears in his eyes, everything changed. What Rebecca didn't know was that the dog she'd been feeding belonged to someone who'd spent 26 months searching for him. And what happened next proved that the smallest acts of kindness can bridge the deepest wounds. The cold settled into Ashford like it meant to stay, October bringing frost that clung to the grass long after sunrise. Rebecca Sullivan stood at her kitchen window at 6 in the morning, watching the steam rise from her coffee while the neighborhood still slept. She was 53, worked the early shift at County Hospital as a nurse, and lived alone in the small house on Maple Avenue where she'd raised her daughter. The house was too big now, too quiet, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. Too many memories lived in these walls. The kitchen clock read 6:12, 3 minutes. Rebecca opened the refrigerator and pulled out the covered bowl she'd prepared the night before. Leftover chicken and rice, mixed with a handful of dry food. The same routine she'd followed for 729 consecutive days. Not that she was counting. At 6:15 exactly, she opened the back door. The dog was already waiting. He sat at the edge of her yard where the grass met the alley, perfectly still, eyes fixed on her. A German shepherd, lean but not starving, with a dark coat that had probably been glossy once. Now it was dull, matted in places, marked by the life he'd been living on the streets. "Good morning," Rebecca said softly, the way she always did. The dog's ears twitched, but he didn't move, didn't wag his tail, didn't show any sign of trust beyond the fact that he was here, that he came back every morning. Rebecca stepped onto the small porch, set the bowl down, and retreated inside. Through the window, she watched him approach, cautious, alert, always checking behind him as if something might be following. He ate quickly, efficiently, the way soldiers ate. The thought had occurred to her before, though she didn't know why. Something about the precision in his movements, the discipline in how he held himself. When the bowl was empty, he looked at her through the window. Just once. Then he turned and disappeared into the alley like smoke. Rebecca washed her hands and finished her coffee. She'd be late for her shift if she didn't leave in 10 minutes. Her daughter Amanda called as she was gathering her things. "Mom, I'm just saying, you could be using that food money for yourself." "It's leftovers, sweetheart. It's every day for 2 years. That's not leftovers, that's grocery money." Rebecca pulled on her jacket, cradling the phone against her shoulder. "He needs it more than I do. He's a stray dog. He's not your responsibility." "Neither were you, technically." Rebecca smiled at her own deflection. "And yet, Mom, I know what you're going to say, but he comes back every morning. That means something." Amanda sighed, the same sigh she'd been giving her mother since she was a teenager. "You can't save everyone." "I'm not trying to save anyone. I'm just putting out a bowl of food. For 2 years." "For 2 years," Rebecca agreed. They talked for a few more minutes about Amanda's job, about the grandkids, about dinner on Sunday. When they hung up, Rebecca stood in her quiet kitchen looking at the empty bowl through the window. Amanda was right, of course. It was money. Not a lot, but enough that she noticed it. Her nursing salary was decent but not generous, and living alone meant covering every expense herself. The dog's daily meal probably cost her $15 a week, nothing catastrophic, but not nothing either. She could stop. She'd thought about it 100 times, especially on mornings when she was tired, when the alarm went off at 5:30 and her joints ached, and she thought about those extra 10 minutes of sleep she could have if she just skipped the dog. But she never did. Because the truth she'd never say out loud to Amanda, was that the dog needed her. And maybe in some small way, she needed him too, needed the routine, needed to feel like she was taking care of something, needed the moment every morning when those intelligent brown eyes looked at her through the window and she felt, for just a second, a little less alone. Rebecca grabbed her keys and headed out the front door. The morning air was sharp, promising winter. She started her car, a 2008 Honda with a temperamental starter and a crack in the windshield she couldn't afford to fix. The engine turned over on the third try. As she backed out of the driveway, she saw her neighbor, Mr. Henderson, collecting his newspaper from his porch. He waved. She waved back. "Still feeding that mongrel?" he called. "Still trying to mind my own business?" she called back, but she was smiling. Henderson chuckled and shook his head. "You're too soft, Rebecca. That dog's never going to let you near him." "Maybe that's not the point," she said. She drove toward the hospital, watching the town wake up around her. The gas station lights, the early risers walking to work, the school buses beginning their routes. At a red light, she calculated her next paycheck would cover rent and utilities with about $200 left over. Car insurance was due, and she needed new work shoes. The ones she had were giving her blisters. $15 a week for dog food, $60 a month. Rebecca sat at the red light, hands on the wheel, making the same decision she'd made every morning for 729 days. The light turned green. She drove to work. That evening, she stopped at the grocery store and bought 3 cans of dog food and a bag of kibble that was on sale. It would last 2 weeks if she stretched it. At home, she prepared the next day's bowl and set it in the refrigerator. She made herself a simple dinner. Pasta, too tired to do more, and ate it standing at the counter while watching the news. The report showed a story about homeless veterans. She watched with the kind of attention nurses develop, professional and detached, but something in one veteran's eyes caught her. The same wariness she saw in the dog, the same careful watching. Rebecca turned off the TV and went to bed early. At 6:15 the next morning, she opened her back door. The dog was waiting. 3 weeks later, Rebecca's car started making a sound. Not a dramatic sound. Not the kind of noise that makes you pull over immediately. Just a slight knocking from somewhere under the hood, rhythmic and insistent, that began when she accelerated and disappeared when she slowed. She drove it to Garcia's auto shop on her lunch break. "How long's it been doing this?" Eddie Garcia asked, his hands already dark with grease from the morning's work. "About a week." He popped the hood, listened, poked around with the confidence of someone who'd been fixing cars for 30 years. His face told her everything before his words did. "Timing belt's going. Tensioner too, by the sound of it." Rebecca's stomach dropped. "How much?" "Parts and labor? 800, maybe 9. And Rebecca, if that belt snaps while you're driving." "I know." She'd worked enough accident scenes to know exactly what happened when timing belts failed at 60 miles per hour. Eddie wiped his hands on a rag, his expression sympathetic. "I can give you a payment plan. Split it over 3 months?" Rebecca did the math in her head. 300 a month on top of everything else. "Can it wait?" "Not really. You're looking at days, maybe a couple weeks if you're lucky." "Let me think about it," she said, though there was nothing to think about. She needed the car. She lived 23 miles from the hospital. There was no bus route, no alternative. She drove back to work with the knocking sound suddenly much louder, or maybe she was just listening for it now. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table with her checkbook, calculator, and a stack of bills. Her methodical nurse's brain organized everything into neat columns: income, fixed expenses, variables, discretionary. The car repair would wipe out her small emergency fund completely. It would mean no margin for error for 3 months, no unexpected expenses, no cushion. She looked at the line item she'd labeled dog food. $60 a month, $180 over 3 months, 20% of what she needed for the car. Rebecca stared at that line for a long time. At 6:15 the next morning, she opened her back door. The bowl she set down contained slightly less food than usual, but the dog didn't seem to notice. He ate the same way, looked at her through the window the same way, and disappeared into the alley. The day after that, she bought the cheaper brand of dog food. Not the worst quality, she couldn't bring herself to do that, but not the good stuff either. A week later, her washing machine started leaking. The repair guy came out, looked at it for 15 minutes, and gave her the news. "Machine's 20 years old, Mrs. Sullivan. I can patch this, but you're looking at a full replacement in the next 6 months. How much to patch it?" "200. But like I said, just patch it." She stopped buying the organic vegetables she preferred. Started taking her lunch to work instead of buying the subsidized cafeteria meals. Canceled the modest cable package and kept only internet. Every evening, she sat at her table and recalculated. The numbers got tighter, the margins smaller. At night, lying in bed, she thought about Amanda's voice. For 2 years, that's not leftovers, that's grocery money. At 6:15 every morning, she opened her back door. The dog was always waiting. November arrived with the first real cold snap. Rebecca's heating bill would jump. She knew from experience, $70 extra a month until March. She sat at her table, looking at her budget, and for the first time in 753 days, she seriously considered stopping. Just for a while, she told herself. Just until the car was paid off. Just until she had a buffer again. The dog would survive. He'd survived before she started feeding him. Dogs were resilient. He'd find food somewhere else. She sat there until midnight, the calculator in her hand, the numbers not changing no matter how many times she looked at them. At 6:15 the next morning, she opened her back door. She'd bought extra food the night before. Better food, the kind she couldn't really afford. She filled the bowl more than usual and watched through the window as the dog ate, his ribs visible through his coat now that winter was coming. When he looked at her through the window, she pressed her hand against the glass. "I know you don't understand," she said quietly, "but you're not alone out there." The dog held her gaze for a moment, then turned and disappeared into the alley. Rebecca went to work, pulled a double shift because they needed coverage and she needed the overtime. Came home at 11 p.m. with her feet aching and her back screaming, and immediately prepared tomorrow's bowl before she let herself sleep. Her daughter called on Sunday. "Mom, I've been thinking. Why don't you move in with us for a few months, just until you get back on your feet financially?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. You're working doubles. I can hear it in your voice. You're exhausted. The hospital always needs, but you don't have to be the one who gives it." Amanda's voice softened. "You could have your own space, help with the kids, save some money. Wouldn't have to worry about that old house or the car or the dog," Rebecca heard in the silence. "I appreciate it, honey, but I'm okay, really." After they hung up, Rebecca stood at her kitchen window looking at the darkened alley where the dog would emerge in 8 hours. She wasn't okay. She was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix, worried in a way that even her nurse's pragmatism couldn't solve, living so carefully that every decision was calculated, every expense weighed. But at 6:15 every morning, she would open that door. Because some things weren't about the numbers. Some things were about who you were when no one was watching, when it cost you more than you had, when the sensible thing was to stop. Rebecca looked at her reflection in the dark window. "You're an idiot," she told herself. At 6:15 the next morning, she opened her back door. The dog was waiting. Daniel Mitchell had been searching for his dog for 26 months. He kept track. 26 months, 4 days, and approximately 11 hours since the night his apartment burned, and Sargent, his partner, his anchor, his reason for staying alive, had run into the darkness and not come back. Daniel was 42, a veteran of 2 tours in Afghanistan, and he'd been drowning long before the fire. Survivor's guilt, they called it. PTSD. The kind that made sleep impossible and crowds unbearable and sudden noises turn his whole body into a weapon that had nowhere to strike. Sargent had been his lifeline. A trained service dog, a German shepherd who'd been specifically paired with Daniel 3 years ago through a veteran support program. Sargent knew when the nightmares were coming, knew how to ground Daniel when the panic attack started, knew how to stand between Daniel and the edge when things got too dark. Then, the fire. Then nothing. Daniel had spent 2 weeks in the hospital with second-degree burns on his arms and smoke inhalation. The doctor said he was lucky. The building had been condemned for years, a squat for homeless veterans who had nowhere else to go. Electrical fire. 3 people died. Daniel survived, but Sargent was gone. For 26 months, Daniel had been searching. He'd posted on every social media group, every lost pet site, every veteran forum. He'd printed flyers with Sargent's picture and stapled them to every telephone pole in a 50-mile radius. He'd visited every shelter, every veterinary clinic, every place that might have taken in a stray German shepherd. He'd been living in his car for most of that time. Couldn't hold down a job. The PTSD had gotten worse without Sargent, much worse. Couldn't focus long enough for an interview. Couldn't handle the fluorescent lights and small spaces and people asking questions. The VA helped where they could. got him into a transitional housing program, connected him with a therapist, tried to set him up with a new service dog. But Daniel couldn't accept another dog, not while Sargent was out there somewhere. "Mr. Mitchell," the therapist had said gently, "it's been over 2 years. You need to consider that Sargent may not—" "He's alive." Daniel's voice was flat, certain. "I'd know if he wasn't." He'd meant it. He did know. Somehow, in the way that veterans knew things they shouldn't be able to know, he felt it. Sargent was alive. Scared, maybe. Lost, definitely. But alive. The problem was finding him. Daniel sat in his car in a Walmart parking lot, his laptop balanced on his steering wheel, connected to the store's free Wi-Fi. He was scrolling through lost pet reports, the same ritual he performed every evening. His phone buzzed. A text from Tom Riley, another veteran from his support group. "Man at the VA mentioned seeing a shepherd on the east side. Skinny, wouldn't let anyone near. Maple Ave area." Daniel's hands went still on the keyboard. Maple Avenue. He'd covered that area 6 months ago, but dogs moved. 6 months was a lifetime on the streets. He typed back, "Address? No exact address, just the neighborhood. Guy said the dog comes around early mornings." Daniel looked at the clock. 7:47 p.m. Too late to search now. The east side wasn't safe after dark, not even for him. He'd go tomorrow morning. Early. That night, Daniel slept in his car in the Walmart lot, the same way he'd slept for months before the VA got him into the transitional house. He preferred it sometimes. The car felt safer, more contained. He dreamed of Sargent the way he always did. In the dream, they were in his old apartment before the fire. Sargent was lying at his feet, head resting on Daniel's boot. The weight of him was real, solid, permanent. Then smoke, then flames, then Sargent running into the burning hallway, barking frantically, and Daniel screaming his name and someone's hands holding him back, dragging him toward the window, and the last thing he saw was Sargent disappearing into the smoke. Daniel woke at 4:30 a.m., gasping, his shirt soaked with sweat. He started the car and drove east. Ashford at 5 in the morning was a ghost town. Empty streets, dark windows, the kind of quiet that amplified every sound. The engine, the tires on asphalt, his own breathing. Daniel found Maple Avenue and drove slowly, looking for, what? A stray dog at dawn? It was a long shot. It was always a long shot. But what else did he have? He parked near a small alley, turned off the engine, and waited. The sky began to lighten, gray turning to pale blue. A few early risers appeared, a man collecting his newspaper, a woman getting into her car for what looked like a work commute. Daniel watched the alley. At 6:10, he saw a movement. A dog emerged from the shadows, lean and cautious, moving with the careful precision of an animal that had learned to survive on wariness. Dark coat, German shepherd build. Daniel's breath stopped in his chest. The dog moved through the alley, disappearing behind a house. Daniel got out of his car slowly, carefully, and followed at a distance. When he rounded the corner, he saw the dog sitting in a backyard, waiting, watching a back door. At exactly 6:15, the door opened. A woman stepped out, middle-aged, tired-looking, wearing scrubs. She set down a bowl of food, spoke softly to the dog, and retreated inside. The dog approached the bowl and began to eat. Daniel stood frozen, hidden behind a fence, watching. It was him. It was Sargent. He knew by the pattern on the dog's shoulder a distinctive marking. Knew by the way he ate. Knew by everything that didn't need knowing. 26 months. Daniel's vision blurred. His hands were shaking. He took a step forward, whispered, "Sargent." The dog's head snapped up. Their eyes met. For 1 second, just one, Daniel saw recognition, saw the ears perk forward, saw the body tense in a way that was about to become movement. Then, something changed. The dog's eyes went wary. He backed away from the bowl, turned, and bolted into the alley. "Sargent! Sargent, it's me! It's—" But he was gone. Daniel ran after him, his burned legs screaming in protest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But the dog was faster, knew the terrain better, had been surviving on speed and fear for 2 years. By the time Daniel reached the main street, there was no sign of him. Daniel stood in the middle of the empty street, hands on his knees, trying to breathe. He'd found him. After 26 months, he'd found him. And Sargent had run. Daniel walked back to the house slowly, his leg throbbing. The woman's car was gone. She'd left for work. But the empty bowl was still on the porch. He looked at it for a long time. Then he sat down on the curb to wait. Rebecca worked a 12-hour shift on Tuesday, another 12 on Wednesday, and when they asked her to come in Thursday, her scheduled day off, she said yes. She needed the money. That was the simple truth. The car repair bill was due in 2 weeks, and she was still short. The overtime helped, but it was extracting a cost she felt in her bones. Thursday morning, her alarm went off at 5:30. Rebecca lay in bed for a full minute staring at the ceiling, willing herself to move. Every muscle ached. Her feet felt like someone had been hitting them with hammers. But at 6:12, she was in her kitchen, pulling out the dog's bowl. She opened the back door at 6:15. The dog wasn't there. Rebecca stood on her porch, the bowl in her hand, scanning the alley. The morning was cold, frost covering everything, her breath visible in the air. No dog. She waited. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing. A strange panic rose in her chest. In 773 days, he'd never missed a morning. Not once. Not in rain or snow or the brutal heat of summer. Rebecca set the bowl down and went inside. She told herself he was fine. Dogs had their own lives, their own business. Maybe he'd found food somewhere else. Maybe he'd been scared off by something. But all day at work, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That evening, she came home exhausted, her mind foggy with tiredness. She prepared the next morning's bowl automatically, her body moving through the routine while her brain was somewhere else entirely. She fell asleep on the couch at 8:30, still in her scrubs, too tired to even make it to bed. At 6:15 Friday morning, she opened her back door. The dog was there, but something was different. He was sitting further back than usual, at the very edge of the yard, and he didn't approach when she set down the bowl. "Hey," she said softly. "What's wrong, buddy?" The dog stared at her but didn't move. Rebecca waited, then reluctantly went back inside. Through the window, she watched him approach the bowl slowly, constantly looking around as if checking for threats. He ate quickly and left without the usual pause, without that moment where he looked at her through the window. Something had spooked him. Rebecca stood at her window long after he'd gone, coffee growing cold in her hands. Friday was another 12-hour shift. When she got home at 9 p.m., there was a notice on her door from the gas company. She'd missed a payment. They were suspending service unless she paid within 5 days, including a reconnection fee. Rebecca sat on her front steps, the notice in her hand, too tired to even cry. She'd missed it. In all her careful calculations, in all her budgeting and planning, she'd somehow missed the gas bill. It had probably been in the pile of mail she kept meaning to sort through. The reconnection fee was $150 on top of the overdue bill. Rebecca put her head in her hands. Her phone rang. Amanda. "Hey, Mom, I was thinking about Thanksgiving. Why don't you come stay with us for the weekend? The kids would love it." "That sounds nice, honey." "You okay? You sound tired. Just a long week?" "How many doubles did you pull?" "A few." Amanda was quiet for a moment. "Mom, this isn't sustainable. You're killing yourself." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Please, just let me help. We have the room. You could—" "I have to go, sweetheart. Someone's at the door." No one was at the door. Rebecca sat in her darkening living room, the gas bill in her lap, and let herself feel it. The exhaustion, the fear, the weight of trying to hold everything together when the foundation kept crumbling. She thought about Amanda's offer, thought about how easy it would be to say yes, to let someone else carry the burden for a while. But this house was hers, the only thing left that was truly hers. And if she left, even temporarily, she might never come back to it. At 6:15 Saturday morning, Rebecca opened her back door. The dog was there, but he was acting strange. He wouldn't approach the bowl while she was visible. Only when she went inside and watched from the window did he move forward, eat quickly, and leave. Sunday morning was the same. Monday morning, he didn't come at all. Tuesday, he was back, but now he was sitting across the alley, not even in her yard. He waited until she'd gone back inside, ate from the bowl, and disappeared. Rebecca stood at her window, watching this transformation with a growing ache in her chest. After 2 years of slow, patient progress, the dog was reverting. becoming more skittish, more afraid. Something had happened. She didn't know what, but something had changed. That afternoon, Rebecca called the auto shop. "Eddie, about that payment plan, can we stretch it to 4 months instead of 3? There was a pause. "Rebecca, I already gave you the best terms I can." "I know, some things came up. Unexpected expenses." Another pause. "Look, I can give you an extra month. That's the best I can do." "Thank you." 4 months meant $75 less per month. Not enough to cover the gas bill, but it helped. That evening, Rebecca sat at her kitchen table with her calculator and did something she'd never done before. She made a list of things she could sell: her mother's china, which she never used, some jewelry, the old television in the spare bedroom. She stared at the list for a long time, then carefully folded it and put it in a drawer. At 6:15 Wednesday morning, she opened her back door. The dog wasn't there. She waited 20 minutes. Nothing. Rebecca left the bowl on the porch and went to work, a hollow feeling in her chest that had nothing to do with money. That evening, the bowl was exactly where she'd left it, untouched. The food had frozen solid. Thursday morning, the dog came back, but he wouldn't come into the yard at all. He sat at the far end of the alley, watching her. When she set down the bowl, he didn't move. "Please," Rebecca said, her voice cracking, "please don't give up on me." The dog watched her with those intelligent brown eyes, and for a moment, just a moment, she thought he understood. Then he turned and walked away, leaving the food untouched. Rebecca stood on her porch in the freezing morning air, watching him disappear, and felt something inside her break. She'd held it together through her husband leaving, through raising Amanda alone, through every financial crisis and every lonely night. She'd been strong because that's what you did. That's who she was. But watching that dog walk away, the one thing she'd been able to help, the one small part of her life where she'd made a difference, undid something in her. Rebecca sat down on her porch steps and cried. Not quiet tears, not dignified sadness. She sobbed like something was tearing loose inside her chest. When she finally went inside, she looked at herself in the mirror. Red eyes, pale face, the face of someone who was losing. At 6:15 Friday morning, Rebecca opened her back door. The dog was sitting in the alley, the same spot as yesterday. He was looking at her house, but not at her. He was looking at something behind her. Rebecca turned. A man was standing at the edge of her yard, 40-something, thin, wearing a jacket that had seen better days. He had a veteran's bearing, that particular way of standing that never quite goes away, and his eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "Ma'am," he said, his voice hoarse, "I'm sorry to bother you, but I think that dog is mine." For a moment, Rebecca couldn't process what she was hearing. She looked from the man to the dog and back again, her tired brain struggling to connect the pieces. "Yours?" she repeated. "Yes, ma'am. His name is Sargent. He's been missing for over 2 years. I've been looking for him this whole time." The dog, Sargent, was still sitting in the alley, his eyes fixed on the man with an intensity Rebecca had never seen before, not running, not approaching, just watching. "I don't understand," Rebecca said. "He's a stray. I've been feeding him every morning for 2 years." "I know. I've been watching this week, trying to figure out how to—" Daniel trailed off, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I should introduce myself. Daniel Mitchell." He extended his hand. Rebecca shook it automatically. His hand was rough, cold. "Rebecca Sullivan." "Mrs. Sullivan, I can't thank you enough for taking care of him, for feeding him every day. I saw you this week and He stopped, his eyes filling with tears. "I've been searching everywhere. I didn't know if I'd ever find him." Rebecca looked at the dog, at Sargent. "But he's terrified. He won't come near anyone. How did he get lost?" "There was a fire 2 years ago, my apartment building. Sargent ran into the smoke trying to warn people, and then everything happened so fast. By the time I got out, he was gone." Daniel was crying now, not bothering to hide it. "He's a service dog. He was assigned to me through a VA program for PTSD. Without him, I've been—" He gestured vaguely at himself, at his old clothes, at the exhaustion in his face. Rebecca's nurse instincts kicked in, cutting through her own confusion and fatigue. This man wasn't just looking for a lost pet, he was drowning, and the dog, Sergeant, was his lifeline. "Why won't he come to you?" she asked. The fire traumatized him. "When I found him on Monday, when I called his name, he ran. I think I remind him of that night, the smoke, the fear. He associates me with the worst moment of his life." They both looked at Sergeant, still sitting motionless in the alley. "He's been coming here every morning for 2 years, Rebecca said slowly. "This is his safe place now." Daniel nodded, wiping his eyes roughly. "I've been watching from my car, trying to figure out what to do. I can't just take him. He'd run again. But I can't leave him either, not now that I've found him." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, "Come inside, let's talk." They sat at her kitchen table, the same table where Rebecca had spent so many nights calculating budgets and making impossible decisions. Daniel told her the whole story: the fire, the burns, the 2 years of searching, the shelters he'd stayed in, the car he'd been living in, the transitional housing the VA had finally secured. "I have a place now," he said. "Small, but stable. I'm working with a therapist, trying to get my life back together. But without Sergeant—" He shook his head. "It's like trying to walk without legs. He keeps me grounded, keeps me from—" He didn't finish the sentence. Rebecca understood what he wasn't saying. She'd seen enough in the hospital, in her years of nursing, to recognize the signs. Daniel Mitchell was holding on by his fingernails, and Sergeant was the only thing keeping him from letting go. "What do you need?" she asked. "I need your help. Sergeant trusts you. If there's any way he can learn to trust me again, it has to start here." Rebecca looked out the window at the dog still sitting in her alley. 2 years she'd been feeding him. 773 days of consistent kindness, of showing up even when it cost her. And now the reason, the purpose behind all of it, was sitting at her kitchen table with tears running down his face. "Okay," she said. "We'll figure this out together." Over the next hour, they made a plan. Daniel would start coming every morning, but he wouldn't approach Sergeant. He would just be present, visible, letting the dog get used to seeing him in this safe space. Rebecca would continue feeding Sergeant like always. Gradually, over weeks or months if necessary, Daniel would start helping with the feeding, getting closer, rebuilding trust. "It could take a long time," Rebecca warned. "I've already waited 26 months. I can wait as long as it takes." Daniel stood to leave. At the door, he turned back. "Mrs. Sullivan, I need you to know, what you've been doing for Sergeant, feeding him every day, keeping him alive, you saved him. And that means you saved me too. I don't know how to thank you for that." Rebecca felt tears rising in her own eyes. "I was just putting out a bowl of food. For 2 years, that's not just food, that's love, that's commitment. Most people wouldn't do that for their own pets, let alone a stray dog." After he left, Rebecca stood at her window watching Sergeant in the alley. The dog was still there, still watching, still waiting for something. "You belong to someone," she whispered. "You're not a stray. You never were." At 6:15 the next morning, Rebecca opened her back door. Sergeant was in his usual spot, but Daniel was there too, standing by his car at the end of the alley, far enough away not to spook the dog, but close enough to be visible. Rebecca set down the bowl. Sergeant's eyes flicked from her to Daniel and back, his body tense. "It's okay," Rebecca said softly. "He's not going to hurt you. He's been looking for you." Sergeant approached the bowl slowly. He ate, always keeping Daniel in his peripheral vision. When he finished, he looked at Rebecca through the window like he always did. But this time, before he left, he turned and looked at Daniel. Just for a moment. Just long enough for something to pass between them. Recognition, memory, the faint echo of what they'd once had. Then Sergeant disappeared into the alley. Daniel was crying again, his hand pressed against his car as if he needed the support. This became their routine. Every morning, Rebecca fed Sergeant. Every morning, Daniel was there, watching from a distance. And every morning, Sergeant's glances in Daniel's direction lasted a little longer. On the 5th day, Daniel moved closer. Not much, just 10 feet nearer. Sergeant noticed but didn't run. On the 8th day, Daniel was in the yard, standing next to Rebecca's porch. On the 12th day, Rebecca invited Daniel inside. They watched through the window together as Sergeant ate, and for the first time, the dog didn't immediately leave. He sat in the yard after finishing, looking at the house where he knew Daniel was standing. "He's remembering," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "He's starting to remember." On the 16th day, Daniel said, "Let me try something." Rebecca watched as he walked outside, moving slowly, deliberately. He sat down on the porch steps, the same way Rebecca had sat weeks ago when she'd cried for the first time in years. Sergeant watched him, but didn't run. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn tennis ball, the fabric faded and torn. "I kept this," he said to Rebecca, his favorite toy, from before. He rolled the ball gently across the yard. Sergeant's ears perked forward, his body tensed, not with fear but with something else, interest, memory, the stirring of an instinct that hadn't been triggered in 2 years. The ball stopped halfway between them. Sergeant looked at the ball, looked at Daniel, looked at the ball again. Then, slowly, he walked forward. He picked up the ball in his mouth and backed away quickly, disappearing into the alley with his prize. Daniel put his head in his hands and wept. Rebecca sat down beside him on the steps and put her arm around his shoulders while he cried, the way she would comfort any patient, any person who was finally, after so long, beginning to heal. "He remembered," Daniel kept saying. "He remembered the ball." "He remembered you," Rebecca said. 3 weeks after Daniel first knocked on Rebecca's door, he came earlier than usual, 5:45 a.m. instead of 6 o'clock. Rebecca answered his knock still in her bathrobe, her hair unbrushed, surprised. "I'm sorry," Daniel said immediately. "I know it's early, but I wanted to talk to you before." He gestured at the coming morning ritual. Rebecca stepped aside and let him in. He looked better than he had that first day, cleaner, less exhausted, like someone who was sleeping at night instead of haunting parking lots. They sat at her kitchen table, the same table that had witnessed so many of Rebecca's lonely calculations, and Daniel set a manila envelope in front of her. "What's this?" she asked. "The VA finally processed my disability claim. It took 2 years, but it went through last week." He pushed the envelope toward her. "That's $25,000, back pay from when I first applied." Rebecca stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. "Daniel, that's wonderful. You can get properly set up now, get everything you need for Sergeant. I want to give you half." The words fell into the quiet kitchen like stones into water. "What? No, absolutely not. Mrs. Sullivan, Rebecca, you've been feeding Sergeant for 2 years. I did the math. That's over $3,000 in food alone, not counting the time, the consistency, the sacrifice. I didn't do it for money. I know, that's exactly why I want to do this." Daniel leaned forward, his voice intense. "You kept him alive when I couldn't find him. You showed up every single day, no matter what, and I've seen the bills on your table. I've seen the notices. I know you're struggling too." Rebecca felt heat rise to her face. "You had no right to look at my private—" "They're sitting right there." Daniel gestured at the small pile of mail by her coffee maker. "I'm not snooping, I'm just observing. And what I observe is a woman who's been giving everything she has to help a stray dog while barely keeping herself afloat. That's not your responsibility." "Isn't it, though?" Daniel's eyes were steady on hers. "You saved my service dog, which means you saved me, which means I owe you more than I can ever repay. $12,000 isn't repayment. It's barely a start." Rebecca stood up, her hands shaking. "I don't want your money." "Why not?" "Because I didn't do it for a reward. I did it because—" She stopped, her throat tight. "I did it because he needed it. Because it was the right thing to do. Because some mornings, going out there and feeding him was the only thing that made me feel like I mattered." The words hung in the air between them. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said softly, "Rebecca, let me ask you something. If a patient came into your hospital, someone who'd been caring for a sick relative for years, running themselves into the ground, too proud to accept help, what would you tell them?" Rebecca sat back down heavily. She knew exactly what she'd tell them. She'd told dozens of caregivers over the years. "You can't help anyone if you destroy yourself doing it. Accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. That's different, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. How? Because I'm a nurse. That's my job. This was just love, Daniel finished quietly. This was love. The kind that costs everything and expects nothing back. The kind that most people talk about, but you actually lived. Rebecca felt tears starting again. She'd cried more in the past few weeks than she had in years. Something about this whole situation had cracked her open in a way she couldn't seal back up. I don't feel comfortable taking your disability money, she said. You need that. You need to rebuild your life. Then let me help with your bills, anonymously. Let me pay your gas bill, cover your car repair, not as payment, as gratitude, as one veteran helping another veteran. I'm not a veteran. You've been in your own war, Rebecca. I can see it in your face, fighting to keep this house, keep your independence, keep showing up every day despite everything. That's its own kind of service. Rebecca looked at the envelope on her table. Inside was more money than she'd seen in years, money that would solve every immediate problem, would give her breathing room for the first time since her husband left, would mean she could stop working doubles, stop choosing between bills, stop lying awake at night calculating which crisis to address first. But it felt wrong. It felt like she'd been operating a kindness vending machine. Insert daily dog food, receive eventual cash payment. I need to think about it, she said. Daniel nodded and stood. Take all the time you need. The money's not going anywhere, and neither am I. I'll be here at 6 like always. After he left, Rebecca sat at her table, staring at the envelope, feeling like she was standing at a crossroads she didn't know how to navigate. At 6:15, she opened her back door. Sergeant was there, and Daniel was in the yard now, standing closer than he'd ever been. Sergeant ate from the bowl while Daniel watched, and when the dog finished, he didn't immediately run. Instead, Sergeant sat down, 10 feet away from Daniel. Not approaching, but not fleeing either. They stayed like that for 5 full minutes, man and dog looking at each other, the silence filled with 2 years of trauma and loss, and the slow, painful work of rebuilding trust. Finally, Daniel extended his hand, palm down, the way you do with dogs you're introducing yourself to. Sergeant stood, took 3 steps forward, stopped, took 2 more steps. His nose was 6 inches from Daniel's hand. Rebecca held her breath. Sergeant sniffed Daniel's hand. Once. Twice. And in that act, in that simple recognition of scent, something fundamental shifted. The dog's whole body language changed, ears forward, tail giving the tiniest wag, shoulders relaxing. He remembered. Daniel made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Hey, buddy, he whispered. Hey, Sergeant. I've missed you. God, I've missed you so much. Sergeant took another step forward, and for the first time in 2 years, he let Daniel touch him. Daniel ran his hands over Sergeant's head, down his neck, checking him over with the careful attention of someone who'd spent 2 years imagining the worst. The dog pressed against him, not quite ready to fully trust, but willing to try. Rebecca watched from her porch, tears streaming down her face, understanding with sudden clarity why this had been worth every dollar, every early morning, every sacrifice. This moment, this reunion, this healing. Later that morning, after Daniel and Sergeant had left, walking together now, side by side, the dog's leash loose in Daniel's hand, Rebecca sat at her table and opened the envelope. Inside was a check for $12,500 and a handwritten note. Rebecca, this money represents what the government says my disability is worth. But what you've done has no price. You showed consistency when nothing in my life was consistent. You showed kindness when the world felt cruel. You kept Sergeant alive, and by doing so, kept me alive too. I know you don't want to take this. I know it feels wrong to you. But please understand. Accepting this isn't about what you deserve. It's about what I need to give. It's about letting someone who has nothing else to offer except money put that money where it matters most. You gave me back my reason for living. Let me give you back your peace of mind. With more gratitude than I know how to express, Daniel. Rebecca held the note for a long time, reading it over and over, trying to reconcile the woman she thought she was. Independent, self-sufficient, needing nothing from anyone, with the woman she actually was. Tired, struggling, and maybe possibly allowed to accept help. She thought about her daughter's words. You can't save everyone. But maybe being saved wasn't the opposite of being strong. Maybe it was just being human. Rebecca picked up her phone and called Daniel. On one condition, she said when he answered. Anything. You let me use some of this money to start a fund for other people who've been feeding strays, who've been showing up even when it cost them. Because I know I'm not the only one. And they shouldn't have to choose between kindness and survival either. There was a long pause. Then Daniel said, his voice thick, That's perfect. That's exactly what Sergeant would want. Then yes. Thank you. I accept. After they hung up, Rebecca sat in her quiet kitchen and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the grim hope of someone determined to survive, but the genuine hope of someone who'd just been reminded that kindness, both given and received, could still change everything. At 6:15 the next morning, Rebecca opened her back door out of habit. The bowl was already out there, and Daniel was filling it, Sergeant sitting calmly at his side. Daniel looked up and smiled. Thought maybe I could start helping with breakfast duty. If that's okay. Rebecca smiled back. More than okay. She walked out to join them, and for the first time in 2 years, she reached down to pet the dog she'd been feeding all this time. Sergeant led her. His tail wagged slowly as she scratched behind his ears, and when she looked up, Daniel was watching with tears in his eyes again. Thank you, he said, for everything. Thank you, Rebecca replied, for letting me help, for finding him, for... She gestured at the three of them, at this unlikely constellation of need and kindness and redemption. For this. Sometimes the greatest act of service is simply showing up, for a stranger, for a dog, for yourself. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember that their small acts of kindness matter more than they know. And remember, you never know how one morning, one decision, one bowl of food might change everything. Like and subscribe for more stories that remind us what it means to be human. Your support helps us continue sharing these moments of hope, healing, and the power of never giving up on what matters.